I'm so delighted to end this season with a bang. I invited Sarah Capewell to join me with this episode to talk all about international tutoring, and as you will discover, she really knows her stuff. And my favourite thing about this interview, about this discussion, is that she's very realistic and very honest about what to expect, even down to little nuances that you may not have thought of. So if you are in the international tutoring market, if you want to enter it, if you're not sure about it, this episode is for you. As always, I'll be taking a week's break with the podcast next week, but I'll be back after that with season 14, and I hope you can join me. Enjoy. Welcome to the Upgrade Your Education Business podcast. I'm your host, Samantha, and I'm so pleased you're here. As an education business owner myself and a former teacher, I understand the nuances that only apply to us. So in this podcast, I share fluff-free, tailored and actionable ideas that you can mould to suit your needs. If you'd like to take this conversation further, please do reach out. I would love to meet you. And finally, it would mean the world to me if you could leave a review. That way, you'll be helping me help more people. Thank you for tuning in. Enjoy. So welcome, Sarah, to the podcast. We have been talking about doing this for absolutely ages. I know you'll do a better job than me, so please will you introduce yourself?
No pressure there. No, it's lovely to be here finally. So my name is Sarah Capewell. I run an international tutoring business called Astra Tuition. And for the last year, I have been running Astra Academy, which is a mentoring program for tutors looking to enter the international market.
And you've got some more sort of exciting things to support people as well going on at the moment, haven't you?
Yeah, so I've just launched a video course, a 6-part video course, to help people who are thinking about entering the international market. And then in January, I will be starting the Global Tutors Collective, which is a membership program really designed to take people on those sort of first steps who are not really sure what they want to do, but they know they probably want to explore the international market in a bit more depth.
Sounds brilliant.
Hmm.
And I can't think of anyone better to lead that way.
Oh, thank
Um,
you.
so I'm going to dive straight in. This is all about getting into the international market. And I really want to focus on being realistic about it so that we're not glamorizing it. We're being really real. And because I know you, having known you for a while, I know that you've gone through a real process to get to where you are now. And even now, a lot goes into maintaining, where you're at. So I know a lot of people think that, or they're under the impression that if they have a list of agents, for example, then they're golden. But having worked with you, but also having known you for all this time, I know that a lot more goes into both entering and establishing yourself. So could you maybe talk us through how you entered and established yourself as a go-to in the Chinese market, which is the one you specialize in, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And you're right. I think just to touch on that really briefly, there is this, I get people messaging me nearly every day asking for agent lists. And I think there is a sense that that will provide them with everything they need. And it is much more nuanced than that. So yeah, I'll sort of go back to the second part. I was head of English in a full boarding prep school, and I was also head of boarding for a time as well. So I had a good sense of what the world of sort of international education looked like. We had students from all over the world. And also I have 2 children who've gone through prep and boarding school. So it's an area that I know really well as a parent, as an educator. And I left during the pandemic to set up Astra Tuition. And initially, it was designed to be a single subject tuition business, doing what I love, which is teaching English, and I still love. And then I'd always had a couple of Chinese students that I worked with, and I really enjoyed tutoring them. And they were all very driven, very conscientious. And I had kind of an epiphany when I realized that actually what I was doing, although I was much happier, I was still tutoring at very antisocial hours, so evenings and weekends. And I kind of thought, well, I'm not really hugely better off in terms of the time, which is the most valuable thing that I have. So and it doesn't sound very sophisticated when you put it like this, but it's the truth. I just thought, oh, if I want to teach in the daytime, I need to teach children from Southeast Asia, and that's where it came from. So I
Was that,
really just
sorry, was that because with the experience you were having, you had a lot of contacts already in Southeast Asia,
Not
or
really.
okay.
Not really. So I had a few. I had a few contacts and I reached out to them. And I also spoke to parents who I knew had sort of family back in China. And to start with, it was very much kind of finding my way. And I sort of fumbled my way to working with an agent, and it was a single agent. And that was after sending sort of copious emails. That was after trawling through LinkedIn and posting regularly on LinkedIn, which often felt like I was writing into the abyss that nobody cared. But I'm very tenacious, so I just kept going because I just decided that eventually it would work. So I just kept going even when nobody replied to me. Then I started working with my first agent. And I actually mentioned this to Astra Academy this morning that they sent me one student because that's what they will do. They'll send you one student to really test you. And I absolutely loved it. And then that went really well. And then there were referrals, more referrals came from that. And I decided that was what I wanted to do. So I really doubled down and made sure that all of my sort of promotional materials, my service guides, everything was really finely tuned towards the Chinese market. And I started working with more agents. I started working with more parents. I then made the decision to become an accredited agent with the Boys School Association because I also have had experience of placing children in schools, which allowed me to see both sides of this process, which was really helpful. So I've got a very clear view of the entire process from when an agent starts working with a child to when they start in a school. And it built from there, and then other opportunities presented themselves as I went along. But I think I really invested time and effort into building these relationships with agents, into finding new agents that I wanted to work with. I put a lot in place and I made a lot of mistakes, but I just kept going until I felt like, okay, these are the key agents I want to work with. This is bringing me a huge amount of happiness, and fulfillment, and kind of built from there.
So you mentioned that you decided you wanted clients in Southeast Asia. How important do you think it is to choose a country or a region?
Massively, because to start with, and this is an example of probably what not to do, I had students in, and some of it was just fortuitous, and some were contacts, and others were people had contacted me. I had students in Australia, the Caribbean, a few countries in Europe, and the UK, and then a couple in China. Now, that meant I was pretty much working what felt like split shifts, that I was, getting up early, tutoring, break, tutoring, until sort of 10 o'clock at night. And that is not sustainable. So one of the things I say to tutors early on is don't start blanket contacting agents all over the world unless you are happy to commit to working all of the hours. It isn't a feasible option.
Well, I also assume that having an in-depth understanding into the culture and the expectations and all of that is really important because that's important in any niche, isn't it? The way
Yeah,
I speak
massively.
to, the way I speak to entrance exam parents is very, very different to GCSE parents, for instance. So, did sort of choosing Southeast Asia, did that help you almost embed yourself in not in their culture, but understand their culture and how they work and what their expectations are?
Yeah, massively. And I think it gave me a very deep knowledge of exactly what they were looking for.
Yeah.
And because, I think I quickly realized that it was the market that I wanted to concentrate on, that I wanted to focus on. So I stopped making inroads into working with the agents and I really doubled down on China because I think it's very difficult to split yourself between different cultures. And it isn't just about cultural expectations. It's also about understanding the kind of schools they look for, the exam boards they sit, the amount of hours of tutoring they want, whether it's one-to-one, whether it's group, and the subjects they want to study for. And if you're trying to manage that across continents, it becomes very unwieldy. So yes, I definitely feel like I understand the Chinese market inside out. And that comes through when I'm working with agents and parents. They know that because they understand that I really appreciate their expectations and understand what they want from their children. So it made far more sense for me to make that my niche than to try and be on top of all these different markets. That just didn't work for me.
And when you're making that contact with agents, with parents, how do you find that they receive you? Because I remember when I first wanted to establish myself in the entrance exam market, I just observed for a while first. And I remember that a lot of parents were quite skeptical about tutors because they saw that a lot of tutors with very little knowledge were trying to enter the market because they saw it as being lucrative. So trust was really big. How do you find that first contact goes? Are they a bit skeptical? Does your knowledge of their culture and their expectations help build that trust?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. And I think it's probably a few of those things. So the minute I have a conversation with an agent or a new parent in mainland China, I think they quickly realize that I have a very good grasp of the educational landscape
Yeah.
and the support we can offer. So generally speaking, I'd say probably close to 80 to 85% of our parents send their children over to boarding school from China. Now, I know which schools they send them to, why they choose them, what they expect to get out of them, but I also know the end goal, which is to get into a G5 university, so Oxbridge, LSE, etc. And I quickly, make that clear on the call that I understand that. And that straight away gives them a sense of, okay, she knows what we're looking for, and it does establish trust. Um, but it does take time. So with one of my key agents, I visit them in London very regularly, several times a year. And that is because, the Chinese really value that commitment, that loyalty over time. And, it goes from sending me one student to sending me, multiple students for different subjects because they trust me. So it's, I did not call myself an expert for, a very long time. I don't think you can be after doing something for a few months or even, a couple of years. It takes a long time to understand what Chinese parents want and what agents want.
And so you've been talking about agents and you're talking about children who want to essentially come to this country, who want to come to the UK. But are there other scenarios that you support, or is this what you specialize in? And I'm asking that because I have never really intentionally taught internationally, but I have attracted some international students. So I had a student from China and I had a couple from Abu Dhabi, and I think I had one from Germany once as well. But and I mean the culture was definitely different and what they wanted from me was very different. But I remember with that Chinese student, she was quite young, but their aim wasn't actually to get into any kind of boarding school, or that academic path wasn't what they were aiming for. They just wanted her to be supported by someone who is native.
Mm.
So there are obviously different scenarios. How do you navigate that? Like, do you think it's important to specialize in one particular part of all of that, or do you support a variety of scenarios?
Yeah, I think it depends. So if you are contracted to work through an agent, so and I know that sounds a bit of a nebulous term, but for anyone who's not sure, so an educational agent is basically the middleman between a parent, a child, and the school that they're looking to send them to, and they support them with that application process and beyond. If you're going to work with an agent, which is predominantly what I do, they will be expecting to send the child to a school or a university. That's the point of them. So for that reason alone, it's really important that you understand the British education system or the American system because they sort of send to both countries. So you really do need to have that innate sort of deep understanding of the British boarding school system and what the Chinese are looking for, because that forms the basis of your tutoring, whether it's 7+ or 7+ day London day school market, 13+ scholarship exam, 16+ entry. It's hugely important that you have that knowledge. And then for working with parents directly in China, which is what I do as well. And I also have an employee in Shanghai who filters parents to me. So when you're working with those parents, I think many of them don't come to this country and they want a native British tutor who understands the education system and can perhaps teach IGCSE or IB. So they're two slightly different things, absolutely. But I think one, if you're working with agents, they're going to expect you to have a really good understanding of the education system in this country, without a doubt.
Yeah. So you mentioned how, your children go to boarding school and also you're an agent yourself. How important do you think that lived experience is? Because of course, a lot of people who might be entering that market or wishing to enter that market may not have that background. They may not be in that situation. Do you think that was a deal maker or a breaker? And or do you think that that's actually the benefit of you being able to teach other people? Is that where that kicks in? Like, what kind of role do you think that lived experience has played?
Yeah, I think it's probably multiple answers to that. I think it definitely helped me to understand very quickly what people were looking for because I'd been through that experience as a parent and also as a teacher in a boarding school, in a prep boarding school. I was used to sending students to certain schools. So I knew the entrance requirements. I knew the quality of the academic teaching. I knew what the extracurricular activities were. So it made it much easier for me when having conversations with agents. And sometimes they'd say really specific questions, like they would ask me about an element of the interview process for a specific school. Now that can really catch you on the back foot if you're having a conversation. You go, I have no idea. So I've been very lucky because I am so I love British boarding schools and I am a huge advocate for them. So I have invested years in sort of getting to know them, in visiting them, in sort of every facet of them, so that I can go into these conversations with confidence. I've never yet, touch wood, had a conversation where I go, oh, never heard of that school. So that helps enormously, and it's allowed me to build the business, to where I'm happy with today. Um, but I would also sort of the other side of that was I would absolutely say that you can still enter the market if you don't have that. But one of the reasons I created Astra Academy was to give those tutors who perhaps had no awareness or understanding of British boarding schools or why that was relevant to the Chinese market, that sort of insight, that insider knowledge, because I didn't want them to meander almost sort of without understanding what they needed to know, because for a lot of the people who I work with, they don't know what they don't know. So I'm kind of trying to guide them, saying, well, actually, this is what they will expect you to know. This is a good way to kind of get into this market. This is a good way to position yourself. So I'm trying to fill in those gaps as well to give everything I've gleaned over decades, so that they are, well armed in their preparation before they meet with agents.
So, I mean, the way you support tutors, it's not just here's your kind of starter of how to enter. It's really tangible. It's really coming from lived experience. You really set them up, don't you, then?
Yeah, definitely. And
Yeah.
and I give them everything. I think that's hugely important. And I think if I'm going to be running a program where I'm showing people how to build a successful business into Southeast Asia, then I can't just do it with I've worked with one agent, I'm tutoring 10 children, or, I've been doing this for 5 minutes. It needs to be much deeper than that. So yes, it's all the years of my teaching experience and working as a tutor and a parent, and an agent, but also it's making sure that they have access to my network. So
Yeah.
my educational agents, my international marketers, my branding and marketing manager, whatever that might be, my employee in China, and then me visiting China to support them. So they get all of that because I think it's hugely important that they understand every facet of the journey, basically.
Yeah. I know you were really instrumental in organizing the trade mission to China that the Tutors Association are running. And if people are listening to this right now, then it's imminent. They're about
They're
to.
today. Well, some are there. So I did Astro Academy this
Oh,
morning.
I
So
see.
one
Okay.
of them's
Okay.
there. Yeah, they're all traveling this week.
Wow. Amazing. Well, this is really timely then, because what kind of tips would you give them to get the most out of that trip? Again, sort of circling back to this perception that, well, if I meet an agent, then that's it, that's all I need. Do you have any top tips of how they can get the most out of that?
Yeah, I think I've told, quite a few of the people who are going to China, because they're now on Astra Academy, which is lovely. So I get to kind of experience it in real time while they're there. So I've said very much treat this as an exploratory trip,
Okay.
and all of them are well aware of this. They're not going to come back as, experts in the Chinese market or with hundreds of agents following behind them, which, is great that they appreciate that. So I think the top tips would be to really listen to what the parents are telling you, what the agents are looking for, and embrace that. And then, I would be there with a notebook, just taking everything down, ruminating on that, and then coming back and looking at my provision.
Yeah.
So they've got one event that they're meeting one of my contacts, they're meeting an agent, she's set up a parent workshop for them. And I've just said, just listen to everything, take everything on board, and then they're going to be WeChatting me as the week goes on in terms of, what do you think about this and what could we do here?
Oh, I love that.
Yeah, well, I think it's important that, I'm there every step of the way, basically. But I've kind of said, just treat this as, is this something you want to, definitely want to work in? And take everything that you are told, really use that to kind of help position yourself if this is a market that you want to be, selling your services into over time.
Yeah. And we're going to talk a bit more about the realities, the real expectations, very shortly, actually. But something I want to ask you is, what do you think the main considerations are that people need to take when they are working with agents? I know we said there are lots of different scenarios, but this is the scenario that you know really well. You're an agent yourself. What kind of considerations do they need to take? And not just when they're entering, but when they're also trying to establish themselves as this trusted person.
Yeah, I think the first thing is to, particularly with the Chinese market, is understand that the parents have very high expectations. They are very aspirational for their child. So they will expect a lot from you as the tutor. And I think you need to have that sort of hyper awareness before you go into tutoring. So understand they're looking for the most prestigious academic schools, the most prestigious universities. And that can really kind of play a part in how you deliver lessons. So it's understanding the high expectations. Culturally, they want the very best for their child so that they are successful and have a good job. So I think you need to be very aware of that and of those aspirations. But also, when I speak to Chinese agents, which I do regularly, and I gather feedback to share with tutors and through Astra Academy as well, they want tutors who are flexible, who are approachable, who listen to what parents want. And one thing that I kind of say this to tutors is that I will often get messages in the middle of the night because, if they're in China, it'll be at 2 or 3 a.m. And it's also about establishing boundaries. So I know in the early days, I would get messages, why haven't you replied? Or they'd send this little sort of tickle emoji. And I'd say, well, it's 6 a.m. I've just woken up. So it's, you really have to establish those boundaries and kind of, say, these are the expectations. And I even at one point had on my name on WeChat, 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. UK time, just so they knew when they could contact me. But I think if you don't establish those boundaries, then it can become quite overwhelming. And, there are very, and Chinese parents will say this, they are very demanding. So you need to kind of go into this with your eyes open, and also understand that Chinese students perhaps don't want lessons in the way that you might deliver to British counterparts. It's a lot about giving them lots of knowledge, giving them lots of information so that they can really, take notes. They want lots of extra homework. So it's a very different scenario. So I think it's understanding where that comes from in terms of expectations and outcome. And that will help you to be better equipped when you're doing the tutoring.
So is it more lecture style?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah,
I didn't know
definitely.
that. Yeah. So, I mean, what are the realities of this? Because, the reality is that when we met, you were establishing all of that and you were setting up that second side in a way. Well, you weren't setting it up, but you were trying to formalize it, should we
Yeah.
say? And a lot of people who are entering the international market will already have existing clientele. They basically, well, I suppose we could say they're setting up a second
Yeah.
business, really. I mean, how intense it is. What kind of advice would you give them, and what are the realities of doing that? I mean, I can potentially share a few bits from setting up a second business, but specifically with this, when you've got time difference and so much to learn,
Yeah.
what would you advise?
I mean, what you've just said is absolutely right. It's I had to treat it as a second business, and that's what I say to anybody who works with me, that you're almost starting again. It's a new market with new expectations. Your branding might be very different. Your USP might be different, and the way you deliver lessons as well. So it's almost like you have to kind of reevaluate and see it as a slightly different branch. So I have Asda Tuition UK, which is very much for the British market. And that when I was working with you, that's what we know were really instrumental in making sure that was all up and running and everything was going the way I wanted it to. And But the Chinese market was very, very different. So even when Chi was doing was helping me on social media, on Chinese social media, because I was just baffled by the whole thing. I don't like it at the best of times. And she said, we're going to change the name a little bit because this sounds better in Chinese. So it's really small things that you might not consider that you have to operate very differently. So it is, you almost have to treat it as starting again, because the students perhaps behave very differently to what you're used to. The expectations, the guidelines are different. The outcomes can be very different, and also the intensity. So often, Chinese, or another sort of benefit to tutors looking to get into this market is that one thing I really found, and we talked about this, didn't we, when we talked about seasonal dips, is that the British market, they would often go on holiday. I say that like it's a bad thing. You're allowed to go on holiday, but I mean, they would have all these holidays. They'd be off skiing, and then they'd be off to, I don't know, the Caribbean. And I'd be thinking, oh, there's no consistency here, which is very frustrating and also worrying if you're self-employed. But one thing that was fantastic for me that I didn't realize to start with is that during the holidays, Chinese students often had more lessons, not fewer lessons, they had more lessons. So it's also being aware of that. Yes, of course, you want to have time off as a tutor, obviously, but a real benefit for me was that I had a consistent income all year round. But these are things that you don't know to start with, and I've had to have a bit of a shift. And if you're not careful, you can find yourself working all the time with your British clients on top of, the Chinese clients and what they expect from you in terms of lessons sort of during term time, at the weekends, during the holidays. So it can be quite a shift in terms of how you're thinking about it.
How do you navigate that? Because I remember you telling me about Christmas Day and,
Yeah.
you know, them wanting lessons on Christmas Day. How do you navigate things like you wanting to go on holiday? Can you go on holiday for 10 days, for example, and not teach?
Yeah, I mean, I still do some tutoring, partly because I have long-term clients and I want to see them through to their exams, and I also get a huge amount of enjoyment out of it. But also, I think it's important if I'm going to be mentoring tutors, I need to have my finger on the pulse. So I need to know exactly what parents, clients are looking for. But yeah, in answer to your question, I do have holidays. I do have time off. I'm very bad at having time off, but I am trying. But I've found that if you have longer than a week off, they don't tend to like that. So they will often say, "Can you have another tutor to stand in?"
Right.
So I've had to have a sort of a backup option. But of course they understand that you have holidays, and um I'm lucky that I work with agents who also have a very Western approach as well. So they generally speaking are based between China and the UK. So they understand sort of Western culture and how we run things. So that has not really been a problem for me. But I think it's very easy. And certainly to start with, I just took all of the work I could get because it gave me that
Yeah.
obviously that sense of stability. But yes, you have to make sure that you are factoring in that time off. It's so important, and it's easily done. I know because I was terrible at having time off, really bad.
I mean, if you were to do it again, would you establish those boundaries from day one?
Oh,
Or would
yes.
you would? So you
Oh,
would
yeah.
sort of take the approach of let me just say yes to everything to establish myself and then start paring back and then start, you know,
Yeah,
what
I mean, hindsight's great, isn't it? I think I probably would have established certain boundaries. I would have said, these are my terms and conditions. This is my cancellation policy, no exceptions, because that can be quite a difficult one to manage sometimes. And I would say, this is when I'm available and this is when I'm not available. And this is what I will do as part of the service. Because one thing I found as well, and I'm sure you're the same, Sam, as teachers, as tutors, we're naturally collaborative. I know it's a phrase that is overused a lot, but
and misunderstood.
I'm misunderstood. That could be a whole other podcast episode, couldn't
No
it?
good.
But I genuinely want to give that value and support and help. So to start with, I was giving away a huge amount for free. So school advice and placement suggestions, assessments, extra elements to sort of the bespoke tutoring I was already doing. And it wasn't until I kind of sat down with my husband and I, sort of showed him my hourly rate, and he said, "Okay, well, how much work are you doing outside of that hour?" And it sounds quite naive to admit that now, but I kind of went, oh my God, you're right. So that's when I talk to tutors about, your price points. With the Chinese, it isn't going to be just that hour. It's
No.
going to be all of the other bits outside of that. So you absolutely have to factor that in. So I wish I'd known that at the beginning, but it's made me better at what I do now
Yeah.
because I did those things. So there were some boundaries I would have established from the outset, like please don't make me reply at 5 a.m. But the others, I'm actually glad because it's made me much more I think self-aware and a better businesswoman because I did those things or didn't in that case.
Yeah, and that's really good advice, I think, regardless of your situation, isn't it? That it's important to have your boundaries. And also, there was something you just said. What was it? It's literally just flown out of my mind. Um, if it comes back to me, I'll mention it.
Okay.
But yeah, having those boundaries and being really certain about kind of what's acceptable and what isn't in
Yeah.
that period of time. I was having a chat with someone who it's their first year and they're doing the entrance exams and they wanted to go away in October, but that's just before the exams.
Yeah.
And it's not that you can't go away, but you can't also spring it on people. You have to have so I think you learn a lot from those mistakes and navigating those difficult situations, don't you?
Absolutely. But, a small thing that, I mean, I've been doing this for ages and every year, every single year, I forget about the time change. Every single time. And without fail, to the point that my son bought me, and I've moved house, so you can't see them now, but he bought me 3 clocks so that I have each time zone in front of me to remind myself, oh, the clocks go back because, they don't change in China.
Yeah.
And so the clocks would go backwards or forwards, and I would be sitting there going, oh, I need to now move everything around. And it was worse when I had students, when I was tutoring students all over the world, that became a real headache for me. So sometimes it's these little things that you don't know until you've gone through them that they're going to be a problem.
Yeah. Well, to wrap up this episode, I want to ask you one final question. And that is, in your opinion, who is this for and who is this not for? How does someone decide whether they want to enter this world and establish themselves there?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I think you need to be fairly robust. So I think you need to be somebody who isn't afraid to take criticism because you will get that. Oh, sorry. So you need to be able to kind of accept what isn't working and take that as feedback and learn from it. So I think you need to be fairly robust. I think you need to be flexible. So you need to be somebody who understands that the Chinese agents can sort of change things quite quickly, and you have to sort of be responsive to that. And I think you also need to be somebody who has the capacity um to kind of, I don't know what best way to put this, but to be receptive to what audience wants. So I think if you don't want to be teaching to exams, if you don't want
I
to
see
be
what you
teaching
mean.
in a specific way, it can be it can be quite a brutal introduction and it might not be for you. So I think you need to be somebody who is who doesn't mind that particular style of teaching, who doesn't mind being contacted, even if you're going to ignore your phone. There are going to be much higher demands placed on you if you work with Chinese agents than if you were to work perhaps in another market or another sort of part of the world, I guess. So I think you just need to be, really aware of that. It's not an easy market to get into. I mean, I find it hugely rewarding, but it can be quite a difficult transition for some people.
So, I mean, would you say you kind of have to be non-judgmental, really? Because
Yeah,
there might be,
absolutely.
yeah, I suppose there might be opinions or expectations or targets that as an educator or as a parent or as a person, you just simply may not agree with.
Yeah.
And that dichotomy, you almost have to be, well, I suppose you have to decide whether you're okay with it, don't you?
Yeah, you do. And that what you've just said is really, really sort of interesting because again, we were talking about that this morning with Astra Academy and Chinese agents and parents will say this to you that, the culture is, even if a school is too hard for them to get into and you know that, they will try until they fail and then they will readjust their expectations. Now, that's very different from perhaps Western values or how we teach or support students. So you really have to kind of accept that and understand that mindset in order to be able to comfortably do this and feel that it's within your remit, I guess, and if you're happy to do it.
Yeah, because you have to get behind it if you're truly going to be that embedded
Yeah,
with clients and within a culture and within a niche.
yeah,
You have to believe in it and you have to be behind it.
yeah,
Even if you don't agree with everything, you have to be okay with supporting it, don't you?
absolutely. You do. Yeah, without a doubt.
Well, thank you so much, Sarah. I knew this would be such a good episode. You've been really generous with your knowledge. And what's the best way people should contact you if they want to know more about how you can support them?
Yeah, so probably the best place is on LinkedIn. So I'm on there as Sarah Capewell. I also do daily stories on Instagram where I'm there as Asta. Oh, I should know this off by heart, Sam. AstaAcademy.uk, I think. But if you can put that in the show notes or something, that'd
I
be
will
great.
do.
But yeah, forgotten
I will
already.
do.
But
Yeah. No, I'll pop the links in the show notes so that
thank
people can
you.
contact you and connect with you really easily. Thank you as always. It's always wonderful chatting to you.
I
And
loved it. Thanks.
I even learned so much there, actually. I found that really, really
Oh,
interesting.
thank
So,
you.
yeah, thank you so much, Sarah.
Okay, bye.
Would you like to take this discussion further? Perhaps you have some questions or you'd like more ideas on tailoring your business. If so, book a free discovery call through the link in the show notes.